Hi, I'm Stella, and this is my podcast, Living on the Edge of Art. When you're living on the edge, you need leaders to inspire you, to help you to make that leap, to get off the edge. And so today I want to talk to you about two of my favorite in the Bible, Ezra and Nehemiah. Here we go. Beginning of 2025, I made the commitment to read through the Bible and to walk you through it in this podcast. And so I'm this far in the twin books of Ezra and Nehemiah. These books tell parallel stories from two different perspectives. Ezra is the scribe and the priest. Nehemiah is the governor and the builder. Nehemiah in particular is so engaging because he tells it in the first person. You feel like you're there with him. Both of these stories take place after Israel has been destroyed by its enemies, reduced to rubble, many of the people carried off to exile in Persia. And when this story starts, these two leaders are finding the passion, the energy, the drive to go back and rebuild. And so for many of us that feel like we are having to start over in some way or rebuild after big changes, for all of us in a way after COVID when the world seemed to change, all of us have found ourselves in this place. And for those of us who are Christians, to live in a time where maybe our whole lives Christianity has felt like it's declining and we're holding on to something precious that we know the world needs. We can find inspiration from these two who looked at rubble and saw a vision of what God would have, a restoration of what was before, but a new birth. It's the resurrection story. It's our story, and it's inspiring. So let's read some of it. So I'm not in the habit of preaching 3-point sermons, 1, 2, 3, make 3 points and summarize. I'm more of a storyteller, I guess. But as I look at these two stories, 3 qualities of these two men emerge for me: passion, determination, and perseverance. So I want to talk about those 3. The first one is passion. Both of these men had a passion for doing this work, and that passion ignited the world. In the book of Ezra 7:10, for Ezra had set his heart to study the law of the Lord, to do it, and to teach the statutes and ordinances in Israel. I love that. To study, foremost, to bring it all together. If you think about it, in this time, there wasn't a Bible. There wasn't a complete collection of the scriptures all together. There were scrolls. They were different accounts, we believe. And so it is possible that Ezra is the one who took the pieces and the memory and brought it all together. In a sense, you might say Ezra could have written the Bible up to this point, because he brought things together. And we know that somebody stitched these pieces together from different perspectives. And possibly Ezra had a really big hand in that. And so as I studied, one of my favorite topics that I studied in seminary, the formation of the canon, or how the Bible came to be, I learned that Ezra is really an important figure. So he's a student, a passionate student. And I love that he studies it and then to do it. That's pretty basic, right? Sometimes we forget the most basic thing, to actually do what we believe, and not just believe it with our head, but live it. And then finally, to teach it in all of Israel. And so we see that passion in Ezra, the priest, the scribe. So Ezra was one of the first groups to go back when it became legal and safe to do so, to go rebuild. And so there were waves that went back to Israel. And a later wave included Nehemiah. Nehemiah had a high status, luxurious position as the cupbearer to the king, the one who served the king his wine. And so he was hearing about what was going on and hearing about the state of Israel. And it says in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, this is chapter 2 of Nehemiah, when the wine was served to him, I carried the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had never been sad in his presence before, so the king said to me, "Why is your face sad? Are you sick?" This can only be a sadness of the heart. What I love about this just little thing thrown in there, he had never been sad in the king's presence. He was clearly a man of just a joyful spirit, but his heart was broken about what he knew was going on in Jerusalem, and God stirred in him this desire to do something about it. And that's the way great things start, is a stirring in the heart. Will we let our hearts be stirred? Will we have those passions? Will we follow them? I saw an interesting post on X the other day where somebody said he reviews resumes, and sometimes people list their hobbies on there, and that people are really boring about their hobbies. They always list hiking, traveling, cooking, working out, maybe. There was a very short list of the same hobbies that everybody lists. And I thought, what would I list as my hobbies? Are they the same old ones that you think you're supposed to say? And I have reviewed resumes and done hiring, and I always have noticed when there's something kind of weird and passionate on a resume, somebody's got a weird, goofy hobby. I have a friend that is just like really, really, really into making miniatures for dollhouses, ceramic and different kinds of things. And it's just like this super intense hobby. But every time she sees me, she has to pull out of her purse something to show me that she made. And it just, we all know somebody like this, right? Somebody who is just passionate about something. And there's something interesting about that, isn't it? And I wonder if we allow ourselves to just live into that, just to be passionate, to be passionate about the weird, goofy thing that lights us up, because God makes us that way. So let's talk about the next one, determination. So Nehemiah gets permission from the king to return to Jerusalem and rebuild. Nehemiah 2:11. So I came to Jerusalem, and I was there for 3 days. Then I got up during the night, and I had a few men with me, and I told no one what God had put into my heart to do for Jerusalem. The only animal I took with me was the animal I rode. I went out by night by the valley gate, past the dragon's spring, to the dung gate, and I inspected the walls of Jerusalem that had been broken down, and in its gates that had been destroyed by fire. He goes on and on to describe the places that he traveled. And I can just imagine this guy in the middle of the night on his horse, secretly, because others had moved into the space and they were going to resist the building. And he's looking at just piles of rocks. This always moves me. He's looking at piles of rocks, and how sad it must be that the grandeur of what was before, to know that it had all been destroyed, and just the magnitude of the work that was ahead of him. When he asked the king permission to go, the king wanted to know, 2:6, how long will you be gone, and when will you return? So I set him a date. I hadn't noticed that before. The king expected him to come back, and he committed to go back. He was going to do this huge work that would be dangerous and exhausting, and then he would leave. It wasn't for him. It was for his people. It was for God. It was for the kingdom. He made this commitment. And so as he gets to work, it becomes overwhelming. Nehemiah 4:10, the strength of the burden bearers is failing, and there is too much rubbish. He gets to this point where everyone around him is drooping. And then it gets worse. There are these guys I call the haters, the people who had moved in when God's people had been dragged off. Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem are all working against him, trying to stop his work, trying to discourage him, insulting him, just throwing dumb insults at him, and then eventually using force against him. And the Bible says that the people worked with one hand and in the other hand held a weapon. Can you imagine working like that? Have you ever worked like that? Where you're having to always be watching your back while you're working. How easy it would be to get discouraged in that. How easy it would be. But Nehemiah never did. He kept working. He was determined to keep going. And Ezra as well. It took a long time. And they didn't give up. And I find that inspiring. And then finally, just that perseverance, that just keep swimming, to just keep at the task until it was completed. And then the payoff of that perseverance, celebrating that the walls were complete. The Bible describes this great celebration, and what's amazing to me is it wasn't the rebuilding of everything. It's just the rebuilding of the walls. But it was that point, I think, where they realized that they were going to make it. And there was joy. And I want to talk about that some more. Ezra and Nehemiah tell two parallel stories, resurrection stories of the restoration. The restoration of the walls of Jerusalem, but so much more than that. The restoration of the temple, of worship, of the Sabbath, a whole way of being. It's pretty miraculous that their way of being, their law, their history, who they were, all of that was preserved when everything was destroyed. Somehow it held on through the grace of God. It was a miracle. And then it was born again, largely through the work of these two men, the leadership of these two men. And so they celebrate. They bring back the Passover. They bring back the law. They bring back tithing and the giving that would help fund all of this and all the systems, all of it. They bring it back. And then they celebrate. One of my favorite verses in all of Scripture, Nehemiah 8:10. Go your way. Eat the fat and drink sweet wine and send portions of them to those for whom nothing is prepared. For this day is holy to our Lord. And do not be grieved, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. I love that verse. I love that we're commanded to eat fat and drink wine. I love that we're commanded to give to those for whom nothing is prepared so that everybody can celebrate together. I love that there's a day that's holy, set aside, set apart, that we're called to holiness. And I love more than anything else that we're to be joyful, and that in that joy we find strength. I pulled out of my boxes my letters, my joy letters. I still have a lot of things packed from my church office, not sure what to do with them, slowly going through and paring down a little bit. But these letters are really special. I bought these oversized wooden letters to put up in my office when I started at Covenant. And there's a story behind them. I graduated from seminary and was commissioned as a pastor. And I was still learning. I was serving as an associate pastor at Oak Hill and felt like I had a lot to learn still. And after a very short time, only a couple of years, I got asked to move to Covenant as the senior pastor. I was shocked by that invitation because I couldn't imagine making that leap to be the senior pastor of a church. And I think what made it harder is I had been there for a year right out of school as the children's minister. And I had served with Valerie Sensing, and I couldn't imagine filling her shoes. She had just such strength and confidence and ability. And the other piece of it was that I saw the hits she took when she tried to make changes. I saw the ways people talked behind her back, particularly a couple of people that did not want a woman pastor there and were unhappy with her, especially because she dared to change things. And I thought, they're not going to want me, and I'm not going to know how to do this. And I was tempted to say no to that invitation and just stay in the safe place where I was. And I remember praying about it and thinking that it wasn't the kind of church that I thought I'd be assigned to. It's not anything I thought I wanted or would be good at. And I remember when I was praying, I asked God a question. What do I have? What could I possibly have that these people need? Because I knew them and I knew the church. And I felt an answer come clear as day. Joy. And it made me laugh out loud. And sometimes I feel like that's when I know God is speaking, when something pops into my head that makes me laugh out loud or surprises me. And I thought, well, I have that. And so it strengthened me. And so I bought these letters. I covered them with the notes of encouragement that the people at Oak Hill gave me when I was leaving, and put some little mementos and reminders on there. And I put that in my office first thing. And every time I felt discouraged, every time I felt like I didn't have what it took, I looked at them and remembered that line, the joy of the Lord is your strength. Just be joyful. And that kept me going for a long time, that reminder that there's strength in joy. And one day I had a really interesting conversation. We were talking about what had happened before I got to the church. It was a great, great tragedy that Val's husband had died seriously, suddenly, while she was pastor there. John was beloved. He was a helper with the youth and just a cool guy. Everybody loved John. And his death just brought such sadness over the church. And we were all amazed that Val kept going and honored her commitment to that church for a little while longer. And so what this person said to me was, I don't think you know what sadness was in this church before you got here, and how you just brought a lightness. I thought, wow, God knew what that church needed. God knew that it would be meaningful for them to receive a pastor that they already knew. So I think maybe they were too tired to get to know somebody else at that point. It was a blessing to me, and I hope I was a blessing to them. And I feel like I really only brought one thing, but it was everything. And so today, be reminded that the joy of the Lord is your strength, and walk in it. I'll see you again soon from the Edge of Art. So I want to give you an update. I'm still doing art. I'm adding layers to my art piece where every time I read a book of the Bible, I add a layer of art. And so the bottom Genesis is kind of grainy and sandy, and there's the Red Sea and the clay to represent God forming us in the Torah, and all of the different layers. It turns gold in the books of Samuel and Kings. And in Chronicles, I felt inspired to make little circles of light almost, for all of the people that are chronicled, that whose light was shining in different ways at different times. And so I'm trying to use different materials, and so I tried something different this time. For Ezra and Nehemiah, I used brown paper, and I drew the building blocks, and I drew the squiggles of the rubble. I kind of like it, that the rubble and the building, and it's kind of interesting. I'm not measuring out to hit the top of the canvas at the right time. I'm just kind of seeing how it goes and seeing where I end up. And I'm going to add a second canvas because I think it's going to be really tall. But I'm kind of having fun with this project, and I can't wait to unveil the whole thing. I showed it to my friend Stacy, and she said, "Well, you're going to label it, right? So you know what each of those layers are." And I thought, "Oh, I'm just going to have to remember." Um, but so far, this journey has been really meaningful. So I think I will remember. And I hope that you are enjoying being on this journey with me. It's been a joy. Thanks for listening.